Good morning. To everyone here and watching live, good morning. My name is Tracy Rogers. I am a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington, Virginia. And I right now am feeling all the feels. I am feeling very sentimental and emotional and excited to be leading this service with my friend and fellow activist, Whitney Purnell of Service Never Sleeps. Today's service will not be your traditional service, and very much on purpose. I'm assuming you all know what we're doing today, right? Okay, it's been in connections, it's been on Facebook, there are signs throughout our church's campus, and it's in your order of service. Today, we are talking about white supremacy. Today, we are having difficult conversations. Today might feel a little uncomfortable. And today, not only will we examine the ways in which we as individuals may or may not be complicit in white supremacist culture and ideology, but how our congregation may or may not be complicit in white supremacist culture and ideology. If this is your first time here, welcome. You have indeed picked a good day to be here. Not only is it a new month and a new season, but today this congregation takes on courage in accordance with our Soul Matters theme for October. And UUCA is indeed a courageous congregation. It is evident in the support given to conduct this teach-in. It is evident in all of the signatures that you see on our pledge banner to end racism outside of our sanctuary. And it is evident with all of you filling these rows today. So if you are just joining us for the first time, welcome. You have indeed picked a good day to be here. Earlier this spring, UU churches throughout the country were charged with a call to action to conduct white supremacy teach-ins in place of their regularly scheduled services. This charge came after discriminatory hiring practices were brought to light within the Unitarian Universalist Association, which ultimately led to the resignation of the UUA president, Peter Morales. 715 teach-ins later, this call to action continues to be an attempt to disrupt and dismantle systems of oppression and racism and discrimination rooted in white supremacy. White supremacy is the belief that white people are superior to those of different races and should therefore politically, economically, and socially rule those who are non-white. I'm going to repeat that one more time. White supremacy is the belief that white people are superior to those of different races and should therefore politically, economically, and socially rule those who are non-white. This is where racism comes from. This very belief does not affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, nor does it respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, as stated in our UU principles. And so, as we bravely begin our journey in today's service, a journey that I am proud to brave with each and every one of you, let us reflect on one question. How can our congregation be the change that we want to see in this world? If we are to be effective at the national level, we must identify how supremacy and inequality live within our faith and our own personal lives. If we are unable to dismantle elements of white supremacy in our own lives and within this congregation, how can we even hope to do so in the country? Throughout our teach-in, there will be opportunities for you to express and process whatever emotional triggers bubble to the surface, and I pray that these triggers will be transformative. There will be reflection sessions after the service and a reflection space specifically for members of color. And there will be a number of announcements throughout the service on other ways for you to be involved in this work. I would also ask that you pay attention to what emotions do in fact surface, especially if they are reflective of what organizers often refer to as the three whites. White fragility, which can be described as race-based stress that leads to the denial and avoidance of racially charged discussions. White tears, which fall when overwhelmed by the enormity of racial injustice. White guilt or shame, which can be felt while acknowledging the racist treatment of ethnic minorities at the hands of other white people. Dear friends, your feelings, your emotions are completely valid and justified in this safe space. Racism is real. But the reason why I, a Black woman, ask that you be mindful of your feelings is because people of color live the reality of racism 365 days a year. And we don't have much time to wait for white people to grapple with their feelings. Brown-skinned people in Puerto Rico right now are running out of basic needs and supplies because of white supremacy. White police officers are getting away with murdering Black men because of white supremacy. Indigenous tribes continue to lose land that has always belonged to them because of white supremacy. And as we sit in worship today, white supremacy culture continues to shape policies and systems of governance. I told you this might be a little uncomfortable. But my hope is that we can all sit through what I will refer to as a collective discomfort as we bravely go deep. And so everybody, take a deep breath. Plant your feet firmly on the ground. Get grounded in your seats. Feel your shoulders relax as your hearts open. Give your inner wisdom voice today. And let us bow our heads in silent meditation. Great Spirit, in the name of my ancestors, in the name of everything that every soul in this sanctuary holds sacred, be with us. Help us to sit with discomfort. Give us the strength to listen with our whole hearts and to leave this sanctuary armed with courage to rally against systems that oppress. May we be steadfast in our efforts. May we stand and speak up always. May our faith keep us on the side of love. With your heads bowed and eyes closed, as we bravely begin our journey today, I'd like you to consider these wondering thoughts. Why is our congregation 92% white? How do you, as a white person, benefit from dismantling white supremacy? How do we, as a church community, benefit from dismantling white supremacy? How does this world need you today?
White supremacy. I wanted to go ahead and just say the word to start us off, just so that you guys can get comfortable with hearing that word for the rest of this service. And you know, a couple of months ago, that would have been a risky and political word to say out loud. But today, people are finally starting to see how critical of a conversation it really is. My name is Whitney Parnell, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Service Never Sleeps, and our vision is to foster a community of concerned citizens who refuse to stop serving for as long as social injustice exists. And we do this by mobilizing communities to exercise allyship, an active way of life that utilizes bridge building to promote and ensure social justice for everyone. We build leading allies to help us exercise love in action. And you know, it's easy for us to acknowledge racism as a type of social injustice, and enough of us are willing to be comfortable with the notion of promoting equality, opportunity, and inclusion for everyone. But usually that acknowledgement is easiest from a standpoint of the short term and the present, by recognizing what we see directly in front of us, rather than examining a past cause that causes racism to still exist today within society. 7 weeks ago, I was in Charlottesville, standing up for love and peace against white supremacy. And I walked away traumatized from the overt displays of hatred and vitriol. As awful as an event as that was in this nation's history, it was an important one. For people of color, it was a way to say, see, I told you. Do you believe us now? In response to concerns and fears that were often written off as paranoia or sensitivity. For others, it was finally a wake-up call to our much larger problem of white supremacy. Yet a common comment after Charlottesville that I find to be one of the most problematic was well-meaning white people saying that we needed to address such racism to show that this isn't who we are, that we need to somehow address this new uprising of hatred and discrimination from these select radicals. While racism may be rearing its ugly head in ways more recently, responses claiming that this isn't who we are as a nation are dangerous and historically inaccurate. The truth is that white supremacy was ingrained in the founding of the United States. In fact, on 3 major pillars: indigenous genocide resulting from colonization, anti-blackness originating from slavery, and Orientalism, a fear of others attempting to infiltrate and threaten the US status quo. And we can see how it continues to exist culturally and systemically in the continued fabric that weaves itself throughout history. The founding of this country is based on the disappearance of its natives. Indigenous genocide affected the original inhabitants of this land as their homes were stolen from them upon arrival by European colonizers. 90% of them were killed by disease, sometimes even intentional as a form of biological warfare, and many were killed in the violence that ensued to take their homes over. A British traveler's testimony read, "White Americans have the most rancorous antipathy to the whole race of Indians, and nothing is more common than to hear them talk of extirpating them totally from the face of the earth, men, women, and children." Manners of continuing to take over this land with zero regards to its original inhabitants continue to be a regular part of history, such as the Federal Indian Removal Act of 1830, which called for the removal of 5 tribes out of their homeland, the dangerous and violent removal referred to as the Trail of Tears. Into present day, we continue to see this community's effects of dispossession through tribal existence and practices designated to specific areas, poverty and lack of resources for education, and continued threats to their homeland being stripped away, most recent headlines being the Standing Rock Reservation, the 6th largest Native American reservation through which the Dakota Access Pipeline was planned to go through and compromise the region's clean water and ancient burial grounds. The disregard continues towards the community in seemingly blatant forms, from celebration of Columbus Day and sports teams being named after the race. The community's needs and humanity continues to seem invisible. Anti-Blackness showed itself upon this country's founding as well, through the form of slavery. As Black people were stolen from their African homelands through the Atlantic slave trade, the legal institution of human chattel enslavement for the sake of economic gain has existed since the colonial days. It's a history that we study regularly, the supposed end of which came after the Civil War with the Emancipation Proclamation freeing slaves in the South and the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. However, Africans in the post-Civil War era faced many rules and regulations that, even though they were free, were still limited. Jim Crow laws mandated segregation with separate but equal status, which included treatment and accommodations that were usually inferior to whites, systematizing a number of economic, educational, and social disadvantages like schools, housing, and even restaurants. While the civil rights movement saw success in legally securing the same rights for African Americans, today we continue to see the effects of slavery demonstrated in Black people simultaneously being treated as both less than and threatening through examples of mass incarceration of Black people at astoundingly higher rates than white people. Significant lack of resources given to predominantly Black communities demonstrated through education, unemployment, and poverty, and blatant demonstrations of police brutality and violence towards the community. A race that was brought here under the notion of being less than continue to receive treatment that corresponds with that impression on literal and systemic levels, seemingly indicating that their lives matter less. And noting this fact often seems to be met with hostility, defensiveness, and as the word that Tracy introduced today, fragility. Admittedly, this last pillar, Orientalism, was a final pillar of racism that I could sense but not quite articulate until made clear through this three-pillar framework. This marks certain people as inferior and posing a constant threat to the nation's well-being, particularly pertaining to others of color. While the term by name appears to apply to people of color from the East, the concept applies to people of color from Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, all falling under an imposed Orient category of abnormal, foreign, and threatening. They've been otherized in various ways throughout history. Native immigration laws, such as the Immigration Act of 1924, excluded entry of immigrants of color to preserve the ideal American homogeneity. Brown people have been noted as dangerous on individual and national levels, ranging from categorizing their individual behaviors as dangerous and violent to associating their entire communities as threats on a national level, ranging from associating Muslim religious practices as terrorists and Latinx backgrounds as robbers of jobs and opportunities. This notion of othering has arguably received some of the most blatant form of open discrimination, with commentary being unabashed and unapologetic relative to Brown people's behaviors, intentions, and threats as an entire community. Brown people appear to be held accountable for not only representing their entire race in a positive manner, but to hold responsibility for making sure that other individuals of their same identity hold themselves to a certain standard as well. The negative behavior of one is somehow applied to all. I have barely scratched the surface with dissecting these pillars of white supremacy, and to dive in deeply with each one will require time that we don't have today. Trust me, I can go on my rants, but I'm reeling it in. But from this very brief explanation, we see white supremacy from lenses of taking from, bringing to, imposing on, and keeping out. We see how white supremacy sets up society in a way where white people maintain power in this country from an economic standpoint of holding about 90% of the national wealth to a social standpoint of being able to exist in a world where they don't have to think about how their race may negatively impact their lives on some manner. We see historical backgrounds of how this began, to systemic demonstrations of how they exist today, to personal experiences that affect individual members of this community. My openness about these pillars of white supremacy has often been met with criticism about my disrespecting the nation or being unpatriotic. However, acknowledging a system of racism doesn't demonstrate a lack of patriotism. It means that we're identifying an important step towards true reconciliation. White supremacy exists all around us, seeping through the walls, the ceilings, the floors, and it exists in us as citizens existing in this society. That doesn't make us bad people. It just means that we'll always have to work on ourselves, examining and disrupting our own thoughts and actions that contribute toward the current systems. It means that committing to engaging and influencing our peers from a place of humility that invites them to commit to doing the same self-work that we're all doing. It means intentionally seeking solutions that work towards a world of shared humanity, a world where we're all embraced for who we are and able to thrive to reach our highest potential. I believe that most people want that in this world and are willing to work towards that in this world. When I was in Charlottesville, I was encouraged by how many white allies showed up to stand up in solidarity with their brothers and sisters of color, even at the expense of their own safety. And my prayers and thoughts continue to go out to Heather Heyer's family for her bravery and the loss of her life. I even have my own personal testimony of 2 white allies who drove me down from Charlottesville and stayed by my side the entire time, no matter what dangers we faced that day. I believe that people will be allies who commit to working towards collective liberation, towards shared humanity, towards love. I know that we can do this, and I'm extending an invitation to work towards that goal through allyship, through love in action. I know that we can do this. So please, join us in a movement that promotes us working and living in a community with each other. But we can't have that until we dismantle the factors that prevent it. And we can't dismantle them until we effectively address and acknowledge the foundations that have caused and continue to perpetuate it. At the end of the day, we need to see humanity in each of our brothers and sisters, particularly those experiencing marginalization and pain. This proximity of emotion and experience is critical to any social change movement. So I invite you to listen to and learn from the brothers and sisters who are generously letting you into their experiences of existing in this world as people of color. May their openness be an avenue for empathy, perspective, and action for the journey ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mariana Johnson. I'm a member here of the UUCA. I was asked to give a few comments about my experiences as a person of color in dealing with white supremacy. And I'm going to try and keep it short because as I meditated on it, it was really uncomfortable to realize how many experiences I have actually had. A little context to my background. I was born in Costa Rica and adopted to a multiracial couple. My father is here today. I was raised here and overseas. My parents are Foreign Service officers. So because of this sort of very diverse upbringing, it honestly wasn't until I returned here to Arlington for high school that I realized that we have a race issue here in this country. Many of my stories are really around what's termed microaggressions, so they aren't nearly as overt, but they're sort of, a good way to think of it is sort of little chips that sort of compound over time. Less obvious ways, really, in which I was receiving the message that not being white was in some way a liability. There was a time where I visited a friend on the Eastern Shore and found myself surrounded by young white men who were literally making jokes about black men dying. There were shotguns in the house. It was a very strange situation. And when I was asked what kind of name I had and where I was from, I simply said Virginia because it did not feel safe to give any further explanation than that. It was one of the first times that I realized that there are some places where I'm less safe because I'm not white, and it was jarring. There was a time not long after that when a boyfriend of mine, we were visiting his family in Florida, and his grandmother looked me in the face and said that interracial adoption was at the root of things that are destroying this country. And I had to leave and call my mom. And that was pretty terrible, having spent the rest of the week there with her. There was a time just a few months ago when, in one of those conversations that come up at places like Trader Joe's, I was, for some reason, commenting that I love grammar because my mother is a stickler for it and had always drilled us on it at home. And the cashier said, oh, well, my family didn't work on it, but then, I mean, we spoke English at home. And and it was this very strange, slow burn where I was like, what? And what was particularly jarring about that, though, was when I later shared this story with a variety of people, including white loved ones. Several people said, oh, but she didn't mean anything by that, and really dismissed my discomfort. And that's still something that is not an unusual theme in my life. I think in part because my upbringing has been very diverse, and people who I'm close to don't always see me as a person of color, despite what the rest of the world might see. And it was a good reminder that there are ways to be better allies. And one of those is really honoring the experiences of people that you love, regardless of whether or not it makes sense to you. Finally, I had a realization recently right here in this sanctuary. Reverend Aaron gave a sermon about, I honestly can't remember the context anymore, about being a welcoming community to people of color. And he said something about being open to different clothes that people might wear when they come to service. And I realized in that moment, I wear athletic clothes every single day to work because I have a fabulous job. And and I rarely dress up on weekends. And I realized that day that I was consistently dressing up on Sundays to come here. And it wasn't just because of my growing up Catholic and having Sunday clothes. I realized that it was because I had noticed that I was one of the very few people of color here. And I felt this need to sort of represent and make clear that my being Latina and my not being white didn't mean that I didn't understand norms, and didn't mean that I didn't know how to dress, and didn't mean that I wasn't raised well. And it was this very uncomfortable realization that I realized I was doing that. Immediately the next week, I showed up in sneakers and yoga pants. Without going into further detail, I can say definitively that the notion that white is safer, easier, more stable, has dictated some of the major decisions I've made in my life. And that's a very uncomfortable realization for me. So I think this is really important that we're having these conversations, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my experiences. Thank you.
I remember Mariana and I were talking about, what we would say during our narrative, and she did say, wow, there are a number of things I can think of, and the feeling's mutual. I remember when I was younger, I was made fun of for talking white. And it wasn't until a few years later that I realized talking white meant that I was articulate and well-spoken. Because, apparently only white people can be articulate and well-spoken. And even today, I still joke with friends of color and family when we talk about code switching. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but how people of color might change the sound of their voice or enunciate every syllable and every word if they need customer service or if they're having any kind of emergency, because that sound of being white might help them to get the service and the urgent needs right away. I remember just a few years ago, I was at a fundraiser at a restaurant, and at the time I had a pretty big afro, and someone, a white woman, came up to me and started touching my hair. And I assumed it was someone that I knew. And I remember turning around and seeing this woman, and multiple thoughts went through my mind. I'm like, where have your hands been? Who is this stranger touching my hair? And then I got mad. Why does this white woman think that she can touch my hair? I'm pretty sure I visibly hexed her when I looked at her, because she apologized immediately and scurried off. So yes, I could go on and on and on about how I've experienced white supremacy within just my regular daily life. Even, yes, here in this congregation. I remember a few months ago, I was meeting with someone who was inviting me to the Offender Aid and Restoration breakfast fundraiser that happened in the spring. And this person was really excited about it, and let me know that, Governor McAuliffe was going to be there, and telling me what he's been doing for criminal justice reform, and OAR has been doing a lot for criminal justice reform. And I remember speaking with this individual, and this member of our congregation was urging me to go. And then this person looked at me and said, if you go, you can thank him in person. Because as a black person, I should be grateful that this white man is doing what he should be doing as a moral human being and head of state who knows that the criminal justice system is racist and discriminatory against people of color and has been always. Even organizing this particular service, I got a whole lot of support and I got a whole lot of resistance. Everything from the way we communicated what we were doing today to concerns that the schedule and the structure of our regular service would be disrupted because of this teach-in, to which I thought, oh great, it's working. To the fact that we were running a little longer today. If it had not been for the important men and women of color in my life and a number of white allies, this would have been another experience or another example of how people of color have to work a little bit harder to meet that white standard of success, to get things done the right way, what I often refer to as the white way. So this is how white supremacy shows up in our everyday lives. And most times it's unconscious. We don't even know. We are all adhering to a script that was dictated by people, by men, who thought that white people were superior. And because of that, we all suffer. We all suffer. When we talk about dismantling white supremacy, we're talking about, in many ways, an overhaul of American culture, because the only thing that is strictly culturally American is white supremacy. And if we don't start to recognize how this shows up in our own personal lives, it's going to be that much harder to disrupt. And so I'd like us to move into some further reflection around this. Deep breaths. Be present in this space. And I want you to consider the following. How are we as individuals complicit in white supremacist thinking and ideology? How are we as a congregation complicit in white supremacist thinking and ideology?
As a white man, this is very uncomfortable for me to be up here, but not nearly as uncomfortable as Tracy and Whitney and what they've had to do to make this happen today. So I just want to appreciate them in this moment. My name is Brendan Orsinger. I'm a deeply flawed and problematic white male, and that's mostly because of white supremacy and patriarchy, and it's something that I'm going to continue to work on my entire life. I'm a lifelong UU, and even with all the progressive teachings that I've learned throughout my life and the religious education and the OWL training, none of those things really addressed that growing up for me. I grew up right down the street in Vienna, Virginia, at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Fairfax, and for the last 10 years I've been going to the All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. I work and support, as an aspiring ally, the work of the 8th Principle Task Force, which is pushing to adopt a 8th principle to the 7 that exist that directly and explicitly confronts white supremacy. I worked for 12 years in government, and 2 years ago I quit to pursue the life that I have now as an activist and organizer. I work almost exclusively as an ally in Washington, D.C. With Black Lives Matter DC, and with the chapters of SURGE in Northern Virginia, in Montgomery County, and Washington, D.C. SURGE stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice, and it's an organization that has brought me along in ways that I could never have imagined to be as least problematic as I possibly could be, and do as much good as I can to support the work of Black and brown activists. I was in Charlottesville on August 12th, and the things that I saw that day will haunt me for my entire life. And white supremacists look just like me. They look exactly like me. I saw people that I could not tell whether they were white supremacists or allies with us. That was scary. I can't imagine how scary that would have been for the activists that I was there with that are Black and brown. The only thing that I found that separates me from somebody who is a white supremacist or that embodies white supremacy are my actions. That is the only thing that I've ever found that makes a difference. The impact that I have, either positively or negatively, on a person of color. There are three things that I kind of wanted to talk about, and I think I just want to emphasize them because they've been talked about by Whitney and Tracy and Marianne. I feel like the work that I do cannot be done well unless I'm very clear about three things. One, I've got to embrace the discomfort. I have to embrace the discomfort of this work and the significant risk that it causes me, socially, financially, mentally, and even physically. There's a lot of risk involved. Our new UUA president, in fact, Reverend Susan Gray, she was there in Charlottesville. She was there organizing a locked arm blockade to prevent photographers from taking pictures and interfering with the wounded as they treated them on the ground. She was there in Boston the next weekend. I saw her there marshaling as I was there supporting organizers of color. Number two, hearing, appreciating, and centering and trusting the voices of Black and brown organizers, especially Black and brown trans, queer, and women organizers. That last song was perfect for what I wanted to discuss on this point. Are you listening? Is a very good question. Are we listening to those voices that are most directly impacted? Are we listening? At the same time I listen to those voices, I must ensure that I decenter my own feelings, my perceptions, and any prescriptions that I think would be helpful to dismantle white supremacy. I've only been doing this work a few years as an aspiring ally. Folks like Tracy and Whitney have been doing it their entire lives. Lastly, last point I want to leave you with, being a good person is not enough in this work. Being a good person means nothing unless you are understanding the impact you have on people of color. For so long, for 30 years of my life, I thought the work I did was good enough. But I still made impact negatively on people of color. And it's imperative that I prioritize my accountability in this work and to let my ego and my fragility take a back seat to the lives and the true impacts that I cause to people of color. And lastly, this wasn't one of my 3 points, but as a white person, I'm taking up way too much space, so I'm going to leave the podium right now.
They say time heals all wounds. I don't agree. Every wound leaves a scar. you haven't forgiven, it's time to let them know. I know you're lost, but it's okay. We've all got scars. You're not alone. Don't turn your back. Don't look away. I know your heart. It's time to carry on. I know your heart. It's time to carry on.
Let's do a temperature check. Where are you right now? Are you feeling a bit overwhelmed? Are you learning? Are you listening? No matter where you are, thank you for being brave. Thank you for being present. Let's all take a collective deep breath and come back to our center, come back to our sanctuary. Because now is when we begin to radically hope. Now is when we begin to envision a better world, a better UUCA, a better life that is culturally rich, diverse, and totally liberating. I'm curious to know what that would look like. Right here in our community as well as in our waking lives. And I wonder who can share their thoughts on how our congregation can be the change that we want to see in this world. Who can say what they value about our congregation and how we can live our values in this community.
I know you're lost, but it's okay.
My name is Margaret Wilson. I have been in this congregation for a very long time. I come from the time of Kim Beach. So I've been here, and many of you know me, and I, of course, know you. I was uncertain as to what I wanted to say. I do wish to speak to something that I think we could repair, perhaps, because it happened so much. I didn't imagine it would happen to me this morning, but it did. What I'm trying to describe is something I will label acknowledgement. I don't know if it's a cultural thing specific to African Americans, perhaps it is not, but generally we're taught as very young children that we speak to everybody we know, that it's required of us to do that. And so if I knew you and I passed you on the street or elsewhere, and I did not acknowledge in some way with a smile or a nod or a salutation that we are acquainted, I would feel that I had really erred, that I had done something quite wrong. But I find here, I won't talk about any place that I don't know other than here, people that I see with some frequency and who see me don't see me. So this morning I saw someone that I've seen many, many times, and I was going to smile, nod, something of that kind, but the person never registered that I existed. And so when I had an opportunity, I went around to the person. Now the person may have been engaged in some other, preoccupied with something else because they were performing today. I went around and I said, may I know your name? And a tag was taken out of the pocket and it was shown to me. And then I said, have you ever seen me before? The person said, many times. Well, now my question is, how many times do you have to see me in order to say something? Or you don't need to say anything. If you simply nodded or if you simply smiled, I would feel some recognition of my humanity, of my existence. So I think that's something that we have done so much better about since we first started working on diversity and being a welcoming congregation. But it's something that still is greatly lacking in terms of our interaction with people who are strange to our congregation. And I see some people nodding their heads who understand what I'm saying, or people who are here for the first time. So those who've been here all the time and those who are just coming in to visit, they need to know that they exist. That needs to happen. Something else that occurs is that someone who's seen me a dozen times may see me elsewhere. And I may presume to give some kind of greeting or salutation, and the person moves about and around me again as if I never existed, as if they don't know me at all. Now, I don't know how to speak to that except to say we're capable of being more welcoming than that. It doesn't cost anything. Nobody presumes to have a conversation. It is simply an acknowledgement of the humanity of another person as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Miss Margaret. Thank you.
I was timed, so I was going to say something else, but I guess I have to sit down.
I'm Alan Kieswetter, and thank you, Margaret. And thank you very, very much for all of those, Whitney, Tracy, all of you who are facing us with what is confrontational questions, difficult questions, listening questions. I've been here for only 25 or 26 years, Margaret, and I didn't date back quite that far. But a feeling I have this morning is a little bit like 25 years ago when we became a GLBT welcoming congregation. We started with difficult questions like this and discussions, difficult discussions, and we made progress. Another point I would like to make is many of you know me as chairing the Strategic Planning Committee, or there are people here who are co-conspirators in this enterprise, know me as chairman of the Growth Committee. Our church has set very ambitious goals to be realized in 4 years at the end of the church year 2021-22. One of my hopes, and I think this is evident this morning, is that we are beginning to make progress. And so, those of you who've studied Latin, my one word for this morning is excelsior, or if you belong to a certain covenant group, right on.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Tsai. You might know me from the nominating committee, and I also served on the strategic planning committee with Alan. That was just mentioned. Thank you all to our previous speakers. This has been wonderful. And I certainly feel uncomfortable right now. I first came to UCA in 2014. And from that time, I have made this beautiful space into my home, my spiritual home. I have laughed, cried, and celebrated my wedding. My dear wife, Cece's here, on this stage right here, in the sacred space that we are in right now. I acknowledge that when I first entered in this space, I noticed a predominantly whiteness sort of age, and I might have, when I was church searching, I was a little bit uncertain, is this going to be my home? But over time, I got over my reticence, and I experienced the energy, the desire of so many people that I have met here who want to dismantle white supremacy, engender environmental justice, fight for equal rights for all beings in their beautiful, beautiful diversity, as Reverend Aaron reminds us. I I say today, let's keep that light going. This is a first step in recognizing discomfort within ourselves and the change that we need within ourselves, and that's what I want. But if I could give one suggestion, and we did refer to it earlier, it was something that I learned in allyship training, which Whitney led a few weeks ago, and I highly recommend everyone to sign up for that. There'll be, I'm not stealing anyone's thunder, but I think there are going to be sign-ups for that later in the fellowship hall behind us. One thing that I learned from that training was that for those who are privileged or are feeling guilty simply because of their own color of their skin, please get over your feelings of guilt. It's easier said than done, I know. On the day after Election Day, when we had that special service in this space last November, we cried, we hugged each other, and expressed our grief. I heard so many testimonies of white guilt, male guilt, privilege guilt. It hurts, but in order to move forward, we need to shed those feelings, forgive ourselves, our pasts, and to step into the light and into solidarity for peace and justice.
I, along with my fellow worship associates here at UUCA, have been talking to the congregation over the past 2 months about our transition to a Share the Plate partnership model for our weekly offerings. A model based not just on the financial donations of our members and friends, but more importantly on strengthening our alliances and our community impact. How this partnership can work has been beautifully exemplified by the service you have seen here today. You have witnessed and participated in this service with Service Never Sleeps. Thank you to Maya and to Whitney for having my back on this promise that we have made as worship associates. The service has been thought-provoking, passionate, awakening. And I'm speaking for myself on this aspect, but also empowering. Anyone who knows me well can attest to my strong sense of conviction. But I'm ashamed to admit that I have not always had the courage to live my convictions. I feel safer in numbers, as we're gathering now. I haven't always spoken out when I should have, nor have I recognized when my silence, coupled with mindful listening, was in order. Today, I feel as if I'm surrounded by courageous social and racial justice warriors. How can we all not feel emboldened by the courage that they live every day of their life? How can we not live more meaningful lives by signing the Live the Pledge to End Racism statement? How can we not attend one of the allyship trainings being offered in this church this month and going forward? How can we not be excited by the social justice album launch and concert right here in our beautiful center on October 6th? We're all in this together, people. There is safety in numbers, and they grow every day. Together we can prevail. Thank you for your generous donations, and most especially for your kind and generous hearts.
I'm very honored to be asked to come up here and say a few words, and I have been so anxious about it that I haven't been able to write anything down or make any plans, but it is so close to my heart to be here right now. I was just thinking how powerful we could be if we do bring the hearts of all of us together and feel each other's pain. I was drawn to come to service at this church years ago when I saw there was something listed, a course called Grieving Racism. And why that particularly drew me as a New England WASP, I'm not really sure, but it called to something about the brokenness that I grew up feeling in my very white supremacist world. And through many different workshops that were held through the church and through the district. I'm so grateful to have been invited in to the humanity of people who are not white, and I started to feel more like a real person. And something about my growing up just didn't do that. It was always being nice, staying in a particular box. It just never felt like I was really in the world with my whole heart. And so the opportunity to be in this world with our horrible history, which talk about white fragility, it would make me want to throw up when I would hear what the reality was for people of color from the inside, from the subjective point of view, which that was never something that I was exposed to. There were people of color in my school, not too many, but it was not on the table, the humanity of everybody. And I've felt a path to my own humanity open up in just seeing reality. And it's incredible to me to be in this room where this is being talked about. Finally, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Brenda King, and I became a UU 40 years ago in Connecticut. I moved to Alexandria at the age of 64, 6 years ago after my marriage of 43 years ended. Not knowing a soul, and joined UUCA because of the warm welcoming I received from this congregation after I introduced myself during Joys and Concerns. A year later, I felt that same warmth when I spoke a second time during Joys and Concerns to share my diagnosis of breast cancer and the fact that my mother had died at age 65 from breast cancer. Since Joys and Concerns was unilaterally eliminated without following the democratic process we espouse, I have not felt the warmth of this beloved community on Sunday mornings. Only in the covenant groups I have joined, I have felt like a bystander, a prop, a spectator on Sunday mornings. To me, the intimacy and engagement which develops a beloved community has been gutted. In spite of the wonderfully inspiring and passionate sermons by Reverend Aaron, it feels soulless without the heart and soul connections of sharing by the congregation, and I pray Joys and Concerns will be reinstated. Other than my Joys and Concerns sharing, this is the first time in 6 years I have been invited to participate in any way in a Sunday service. So thank you, Tracy. Lastly, years ago when I saw "We Are a Welcoming Congregation" posted on UU buildings all across the country, I was heartbroken to learn that people of color were not included in that welcoming sense. So that has saddened me ever since. Thank you.
My name is Betsy Rosenblatt Rosso,
and I've been part of this community for 3 years. What I wish for our congregation and our community and our world is that we would spend some more time and intention in listening to other people's stories and walking in their shoes. My whole life, I have asked a lot of questions and enjoyed hearing and retelling people's stories. It's what I do for a living. It's what I do for fun. I have a podcast called 5 Questions, where I ask all kinds of people 5 questions, like, if you could go back to a moment in your family's history and witness it, what would it be? Or if you could have anybody from the world come to your house for dinner, who would it be? One of the questions I've asked is, if you could be invisible for a day, what would you do? And a while ago, I interviewed Osa Obaseki, who's a wonderful community member, dad, rapper. He's been part of our services here with his group Sanctuaries DC. And he is a black man. His parents are from Nigeria. And I said to him, if you were invisible for a day, what would you do? And he said, it's funny that you ask that, because I already feel like I'm invisible. He said, when I go places like my kid's school and I want to talk to a teacher, people just, walk right by me or look right through me. Or when I go into a store, they'll want to serve everybody else but me. And I was just stunned to hear that. I would never have imagined that he would feel that way, and I think about that all the time. And so I just feel like if we took the time to ask more questions, to hear people's stories, to walk a mile in their shoes, or even walk a short distance in their shoes, that we would be more welcoming and more loving.
Hi, I'm Jane Schwartz. I've gone to this church since I was like 5 years old, somewhere around that time. I go to West Springfield High School, and I'm in their theater program, which is super cool. And my teacher is recently become very interested in social justice plays and productions. And he recently facilitated a discussion surrounding the events in Charlottesville. And I think a lot of the people in my class were pretty shocked to hear what happened. It was almost like some of them didn't even know what had happened. And I mentioned a quote in my class that got people pretty angry. I said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. So let me explain that a little bit. That means America hasn't ever been free, because it hasn't been free for everybody. And at my school, we have a lot of military kids, people who have grown up with a really large sense of patriotism, and to them, that was like an attack on what they believed. But then I played this video that was like a Vice video of these white, angry skinhead men chanting, "Jews will not replace us. Blacks will not replace us. You will not replace us. These streets are our streets." And the looks on their faces, I swear some of them were about to throw up, because it's nauseating to see that. I showed this video and it shocked them, and it shocked me that it shocked them. I've grown up in this church, and I've gotten to watch it grow, and I've grown with it. We make a lot of promises, a lot of oaths, and sometimes we break those promises. And I think the most important thing we need to do as Unitarians is to acknowledge when we break those promises, because we all will. And if we continue to acknowledge when we've broken those promises and talk about it with our friends and family and neighbors, I think we can be great people. Thank you.
I am 9 years old, and today I'm here to talk to you about the way I feel when I'm at church. I want you to know that I feel safe here and welcome here. I have been coming here since I was 2 years old. I come from a diverse family. My mom, Jennifer Cass, is from New York City and has been coming to this church since 2001. She adopted my sister Sierra in 1998 from Bolivia. I became a part of this family 10 years later from Ethiopia as a baby in 2008. I really like coming to UUCA. I have made friends here, both grown-ups and kids, and everyone is really friendly. I really enjoy being a part of Chalice Theater, where people who are young and old and come from different backgrounds get to be creative together. Thank you, Sarah Priestman, for encouraging me to join Chalice. Chalice has been really important to me. I like that the two productions I've been a part of, South Pacific and Shrek the Musical, had important messages about love and inclusion, and that made me feel loved and included. And I think being a part of the children's choir, and I like being a part of the children's choir. Miss Beanne is awesome, and I love singing with my friends. I do like RE, but I think it would be cool if we had more people from outside of our church come and talk to the kids during RE. It would be great to hear from people from different countries who could come and tell us about their country, kind of like culture informants. I would like to do more work in the community with UUCA. I think more field trips would be fun. Maybe like to places with AFAC and Goodwill and places that help immigrants. I think it's important to help people who need it and stand up for what is right and push back against people's hate and ignorance. Thank you for letting me talk today.
I know you're lost, but it's okay. We've all got scars, and you're not alone. Don't turn your back, don't look away. I know your heart. It's time to carry on. It's time to carry on.
As an undergraduate, I shook Bobby Kennedy's hand, and I leaned out over a balcony so that I would not miss hearing one word that Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver spoke. And I occupied the University of Nebraska's ROTC building, demanding an end to the Vietnam War and a multicultural curriculum. I thought that I knew something about activism. But as a college professor, I heard Bell Hooks, a Black feminist scholar, speak. And she said that she was tired of hearing white scholars say that they knew not enough about African American literature and culture, not enough to have an opinion, not enough to co-teach or to incorporate that culture, that literature into their English classes. Well, that galvanized me. And I spent decades researching Black women's strategies for activism. 18th and 19th century American women's strategies. And I was able to trace the ways in which white activists, women, learned from their Black counterpoints. That history, learning that history transformed my DNA. It altered the way that I think about American history, law, religion, culture, my daily life. When I retired, I missed that teaching. So I offered a little 2-night class through Wellspring Wednesday, and I taught the texts that had taught me. I made them available. 1742, Lucy Terry Prince's ballad. And that transformed, that group is still together. We trade on taking the lead, and that Black Women Writers Group is a part of UUCA's effort to live the pledge to end racism. I hope that you will join us. I hope you'll sign up for the Live the Pledge to End Racism book group, which often meets on Friday nights. I hope that you will engage in a new way to end racism. And you can learn about all kinds of things that are going on in our church in the fellowship hall after the service. I know you're already working, but there are new ways. There are just always new ways to learn and to do a better job. It's just a continuing, daily, life-giving challenge. Sign up for an allyship training. Sign up for a Live the Pledge to End Racism training. Attend Friday night's launch of Whitney's album with producer Joshua Davies. Come out on Wednesday, October 18th. One of our own members, Marietta Tanner, I've asked to share stories of her past. She has a new book that she's published, Driving in Second. And I think her stories are amazing. March with Black Lives Matter or Surge. The thing is, let's anchor ourselves here at UUCA, but let's work this work into our daily schedules, our daily lives. We have remarkable partners in this journey. We are all standing on the shoulders of giants.
So before we end this service, I just want to say on behalf of Whitney and myself, thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being present. Thank you for being brave. This work, as you all know, is not easy. If it were easy to change, we'd all be changed. And if there's anything really important that we would love for you to take away from this service, it would be what we're calling the 5 teach-in bullets. So, number 1, I forgot. Number 1, if you have been triggered, if you are feeling some kind of way, if you are not well, if you are questioning, if you are just upset, sit with those feelings. Don't send emails to the ministers being upset about what came up for you. Don't send emails to our staff. Don't send emails to myself and Whitney. Sit with whatever it is that you're feeling. Ask yourself, what is this? Why has this come up for me? And sit with it. Bullet 1.
Bullet 2. So there's a lot that we'll have to be learning and unlearning for the rest of our lives in regards to white supremacy, especially as white people. But with that, do not tokenize your people of color in order to get that learning. I always say, see what is shared by people of color as a gift that you can put inside your treasure chest of knowledge and use as a way to empathize and have compassion with and support. Don't go to them exhausting them more by saying, tell me everything about your experience, but rather step outside these walls and place yourselves in places where circumstantially you are the minority, where you can learn by experience and by community with brothers and sisters who just happen to be of different races.
So hashtag not a token. Bullet number 3. Reverend Molly Gordon wrote an article that is titled, "Sin is Personal, It's Not Just Systemic." And I know that you don't like that word sin very much. And at the same time, when we think about the ways in which we as a congregation, we in our individual lives may not be complicit in white supremacy, it's kind of sinful. And so we all are responsible for doing this work. And we all can do this work together. It doesn't need to start here at UUCA, although it's a wonderful place to start. This is work that needs to extend beyond our church walls in your own personal lives. So this work is important.
Point 4, SNS's hashtag is too inspired to be tired. At the end of the day, we believe that we can do this. Do we believe that we can do this?
Absolutely.
Yes. So walk out of here too inspired to be tired and ready to fight for shared humanity through love and action, believing that this can happen if we all commit to this.
And finally, bullet number 5, don't thank us, join us. Don't thank us, join us. There are a number of ways that you can insert yourself in this work. Thanking isn't probably the best way, so join us. And as we close up, there are a couple of assignments that I want to give you, okay? Especially as we consider to reflect on this question of how can our congregation be the change that we want to see in the world? What are some of the things that you value about this church, about our community? What are some wishes that you might have? You all should have received pieces of paper on your way in to write those wishes out. And you can dump them on your way out on wishing jars outside of our sanctuary. So be creative. Tell us what you want to see happen in our congregation. Tell us how you feel we can move forward to be more inclusive, to be more culturally rich, to be more diverse. And so I invite all of you to stand as you are able.
So, man, I am losing my words, and Tracy's bringing me into the center. Okay, so I'm losing all my words. We gotta live our pledge, and it's way easier to do that when we can learn how to stop seeing racism and white supremacy as something outside of ourselves or a problem to be solved, but instead to see it both as something outside and inside, something that's in our bloodstream. And so, on behalf of all of us, I hope we can join together in embracing our discomfort, in letting go of the shame and the guilt that prevents us from becoming strong and healthy and connected. We're all fragile because we're human beings. White people, we got to get over our fragility, as well as the temptation to become reactive or defensive, or to think of ourselves as the good white liberal, the good white person. In the end, this is spiritual work, this is soul work. We can change the world, but the hardest and most important struggle has to be inside of us. When we say Black Lives Matter, we have to mean it all the way to the center of ourselves.
So my wish, as we close out, is that we all ultimately work towards shared humanity, a world where we're all embraced for who we are and able to thrive to our highest potential. Because at the end of the day, what we're fighting for is love in action, and love must win.
Yes, and my wish is that we all leave this sanctuary changed, that we leave with a bit more courage, that we leave feeling braver than usual to do this work in a way that is wholehearted. Thank you. Thank you for being here.